To welcome you to the second session of Biabeag and to Highbank Orchards, and thank you so much for coming and supporting us. Just a few housekeeping regulations first. In the unlikely event of a fire, we have an exit here directly out of this room, but we also have a fire exit through the room you came in to the right. We would also like to remind you that the Biabeag series, please keep an eye on the website at all times, because the next one in June will be beer, and then we will be moving into coffee and chocolate coming into our Christmas time. We also have, as Keith will tell you, Understanding by Design, and he'll be telling you a little bit more about that, which is on the 10th of May. So without further ado, I'll hand you to the instigator of all of this and our host tonight, Keith Bohanna.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening. So first of all, thank you so much to all of you for coming along. I'll do a chunk of thanks at the end of the evening, but primarily to you. This is Biabeag. My name is Keith Bohanna. I'm a foodie, so I enjoy really, really good food, and I enjoy the artisan producers whose passion powers that food. And for me, the sole purpose of doing events like this is that I get the chance to enjoy listening to the stories and the passions of three artisan producers each time we do it, which is wonderful for me. I really, really enjoy it, and to get the chance to share that with you is fabulous. This is the first one that I've done under the umbrella of Slow Food. The bread one, which was on the 25th of January, wasn't. This one is, and from here on we'll be working under the auspices of the Slow Food Convivium in the southeast, and I'm really, really comfortable with that. Quickly for me, who here was at bread? Okay, so thank you very much for coming back. That's about half of you. How many people travel from outside Kilkenny? Okay, that's really interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time out to come considerable distance to get here. Really, really appreciate that. The format of this is really, really simple. You won't hear an awful lot from me, or precious little, as little as I can get away with. Oi. Okay, there's people in the audience who know me. This is about the three food producers, Siobhan, Helen and Tom, and it's about you. During the bread session over the 2 hours that the bread ran, the vast majority of questions and discussions happened between the three producers and the audience, and that's exactly the way it should be. Each of them is going to give a 2 or 3 minute intro to themselves to kick off, and then we're going to have Siobhan, who travelled from Clare today to be with us. We'll talk for about 20 to 30 minutes, just telling us her story. Then we're going to have Helen, and we're going to finish up with Tom. At any point, ask questions, start discussions, drill into any particular aspects of cheese making, cheese eating, the production of cheese, the keeping of the animals, the milks that are used that you're interested in. That's part of what this makes this so special. We'll go on for about 2 hours. It'll finish at this point. It's 6:15 now. Between 8 and 8:15, whenever the energy starts to fade in the room, we'll call it a night. And the cheeses, all the cheeses are for sale downstairs afterwards. So without further ado, we're going to kick off with intros. So both Helen and Tom are going to do very brief intros to themselves, so you get a sense of them before we start into hearing Siobhan's story. So Helen.
Helen Finnegan from Knockdrinna and Cheese. I'm based just out the road, just 8 miles or so from here in Stonyford. And I started 10 years ago this year, so it's our 10th anniversary. And we make a whole range of cows, goats and sheep cheeses. I think that's enough.
Thank you very much. Tom.
Tom Burgess. I'm from, I make Coolattin Cheddar, and I'm from West Wicklow. And I'm actually halfway between Tola and Cheddar, if anybody knows the area. And I have my own dairy herd and my own farm, and it's a summer calving, grass-based milk production. And I started 10 years ago as well. And when I got interested in cheese and looked into it, I realised that grass-based milk, or milk from cows that eat grass, does produce the best product, best cheese product, most flavour. And I wanted to take advantage of that. I felt there was a room for me to get into it and have a product I would sell that you would like.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Siobhan, and I'm from St. Tola Goat Farm, just outside the village of Ina in West Clare, going on the main road from Ennis out towards Hinge, Doolin and the Burn, just south of the Burn. I don't know, has anybody here been to the farm? I don't think so, but probably around West Clare. And I was told earlier on we might need an interpreter for my West Clare accent. Just stand up ahead. A gentleman already speaking Italian to me, and I definitely couldn't understand him or me. But St. Tola, I started making St. Tola 15 years ago on my parents' farm in Ghairbhith in Ina. But St. Tola has actually been made in Ina since 1988. The original producers, Meg and Derek Corden, actually moved from County Wicklow. They had been involved in breeding horses. They had a stud farm, and during one of the many recessions Ireland seemed to go through every 20 years or 30 years, however many, they had to move from County Wicklow and they moved to West Clare. And they bought a small farm in Ina, just at the foot of Mount Callan. Mount Callan is the highest mountain or hill really in County Clare, which has its unique characters in that, I suppose, because it's just 7 miles in off the coast of the Atlantic coast. It's where the rain, it's where the clouds first hit, so we get a lot of rain in West Clare. And I don't come often to this side of the country, but when I do get the opportunity to drive over, I'm always remarking on all the beautiful fields and land and green. It's so lush, and I keep on saying to myself, oh my God, if I had my goats here on this side, the yields I'd be getting from my goats. And then as I drive back, usually after I say, okay, I better not tell John about all the, because he said, what are we at all in West Clare rearing goats? Because as Tom will tell you, it all comes from the land, basically. That's where it all starts. And when Meg and Derek were making their cheese, when they started first of all in the 80s, it was just the start, I suppose, of cheese making again in Ireland. And at that stage, I suppose goat's cheese was really unheard of. It wasn't being made in Ireland at all at the time. But Meg had spent a year over in France just in finishing school. So she decided it wasn't, the land in West Clare was not a land for breeding horses for racing. So they decided to go into goat farming. And so she went over to France for a year, over to Normandy, and that's where she learned how to make goat's cheese. And initially when she started, she actually produced milk first of all, and that's how my family got to know them, because two of my younger sisters had very bad asthma when they were born. And unlike now, where goat's milk is widely available in the supermarkets and everywhere, it was very difficult to get the time. But Meg and Derek used to actually produce milk in plastic bags, frozen milk, and we used to go down and buy the milk off them, and that was our first introduction to goat's milk. I was a child of the 60s and 70s, so I was raised on Easy Singles and Laughing Cow and Calvita, and knew no more. That's what was there at the time. And I'll never forget one of the first times that Mum and Dad brought us to France on a camping holiday. I was about 13 at the time, and my uncle and cousins came as well, my aunt, and my uncle had travelled a lot because he was working with for an embassy. And I remember sitting at the campsite one evening, and he was eating a blue cheese, which we had never seen before. And so as kids, we were looking at him eating this, and we were saying, that looks gone off, Uncle Mihal. And we said, it looks like it's mouldy. And he says, it is mould. And of course we were horrified. Mould. I said, that'll make you sick. And he said, no, it's good mould, you know. And we just couldn't fathom this at all. We wouldn't go near it. I mean, little did I know that 20 years later I would be pushing mould on people and how wonderful it is. And that's why I purposely, as I was saying to Helen, that's why I purposely brought along cheeses, and the cheese will be tasty and have mould on them, because there is still this fear in Ireland about mould. But that's what cheeses and handmade and handcrafted cheese is about. You know, moulds are good. You've good moulds and bad moulds. But I mean, real handmade cheeses, they do not look the same all the time. It's like anything else. Probably a lot of you bake, and Coolattin. And then every time you make something, it very much reflects your mood and the ingredients you use at the time. And it's the same when you're making a cheese. It very much reflects the quality of the milk you're getting from the animals and your temperament. I think you agree as well at the time with the cheese. So that's where I suppose my first introduction to different type of cheeses was over in France at the time. I went off to college and became a primary school teacher. My parents and my older sister had been primary school teachers, so I kind of fell into the natural progression of teaching. And but after some time I decided this wasn't, well, actually halfway through college, but being the good girl I was, I finished college, as people did in those days. So I stuck with it. But we had the farm. Mum and Dad always had the farm at home, but they leased out the farm to our neighbours. But we always had a couple of cows or donkeys or, and a few hens and that. But it wasn't a commercial farm or viable farm at the time. They had leased out. But when I was teaching up in Galway, and I loved Galway, I was in Galway City, and I had always helped out with Megan Derry during the summer, just with extra work helping the cheese making, or even with the making with the goats at the time. And I was always intrigued. And then coming from, it's a 60-acre farm that my parents have, that I've leased off them. And as I said, it's West Clare land. It's very peaty, it's boggy, it's not the fertile, green, beautiful acres that we see over here. It's also an organic farm, so we do have a high percentage of rushes, especially in the last couple of years. And to my amazement, goats don't like rushes, which I did not. I thought goats ate everything when I first started dealing with goats. Because I think we have this perception, that goats do literally eat everything and are good, hardy animals. But actually, when it comes to a dairy goat, like any dairy animal, they need to be looked after, because you need to look after them so that they will give you the quality of milk that you need to make your good cheese that people will like and taste and buy. So I felt it was a shame. There were 6 of us. I have 5 siblings, and I thought it was unfortunate that one of us wasn't doing something with the farm, because the older I get, the more I realise how important land is and how finite land is, not only in our country but actually in the world. And it's actually shrinking from what we're hearing, with climate change, and we're going to have more water than land soon. And I think it was important that, I suppose, because we were brought up on the farm, we kind of took it for granted, and we didn't make much of it because it was always there. And so as I got older, I suppose I began to realise that how important actually the land was, and how important it was to keep it viable and to keep it in our family, rather than having big kind of commercial farms just got bigger and bigger and lost their sense of identity. I was lucky in that, I suppose, Megan Derry, who I had worked with when I was a teenager, and then when I was in college and even when I was teaching, they were actually retiring, and they actually hadn't family themselves. And to them, their goats were their family, and we're very proud. We're very proud of their goats and very proud of what they had, what they had done and how they had set up the St. Tola brand name. And at a time which was very difficult, coming out of a recession, where people knew practically nothing about goat's cheese except those people who had travelled abroad. So I then saw it as because when I was working with them, I saw it as an opportunity to do something, that would actually work and was still in keeping with the ethos and the philosophy that Megan Derry had. Because we were still, our farm was just 2 miles up from their farm, so we were still talking about the same quality of land. So we're talking about the same grass texture that and that the goats would be eating in that. So in 1998, in my wisdom, I gave up my permanent and pensionable job. I said to somebody recently I could be retiring in about 6 or 7 years' time on a big pension, but here I am, and it's been quite a roller coaster ride in the last 15 years. I suppose I went in very innocently in one way, my eyes wide shut, I would say, into making goat's cheese. And I was just saying to this young couple earlier, there's two different sides to what I do. There's the farming side of it, because we produce all our milk on our own farm, and then there's the cheese making side of it. And where they complement one another, they're also quite demanding of one another, and are two quite separate enterprises. But for me, it has always been about doing something with the farm. It wasn't that I wanted to have a business or that I wanted to produce something. It was about having a viable farm and being able to keep the farm in our family name, and that we could do something with it that would that would keep it in existence and viable. So when I worked with Meg and Derek for the first year full time, when I went with them, working with them, and my brother-in-law John was with me at the time too. I suppose when you go into these things, first of all, you're full of enthusiasm and energy, and you're soaking up all the information you can get. And I suppose the first thing that I found out from Meg and Derek, as I said, is about looking after the animals, because the animals will give to you, what you give to them. And goats, unlike cows and sheep, are quite tender animals, and they feel the elements, the weather elements, like we do. Which is something which wasn't really brought home to me the first year or two when I was actually involved in St. Tola, that they are very susceptible to the weather. And that's why you often would see goats on many golf courses have goats on the course, because they sense the rain before humans would, and they hit for shelter. Because so when the golfers see the goats moving, they know it's time for them to go or put on the gear as well. They don't, but their skin is actually very similar to ours, because they have no subcutaneous fat, so they feel the wind, the rain and the cold like we do, which is something I didn't realise, because like being brought up in North Clare, we were used to the hardy mountain goats of the burn. But those goats, those animals have acclimatised to the environment they've been brought up in, like we would too if we were set up in the wild, if we were thrown into the wild. But your farm goat needs to be looked after and cared for. So even when we had the very good fine weather, exceptional summer, but hopefully it won't be an exception, last year the goats still needed shelter, because it actually got too hot for the goats. Last year they actually got sunburnt some days, which was the first time we ever experienced that, but they did. But you have to be very careful with goats, because what they say is a sick goat is a dead goat. So you try and avoid them getting sick, because their immune systems are quite weak. And obviously when you do it organically, you have to be very careful in how you treat them. So it's about prevention rather than cure. So in the year 98, I worked with Meg and Derek full time while we were while we were building up on our farm 2 miles up the road. Originally we had intended on doing up the small old farm sheds that we had on the farm, but when we looked at it and we got advice, it wasn't in the centre of the farm, it was on the edge of the farm. The buildings were very old, and really you'd spend more time knocking them and rebuilding. So we actually built from scratch in the centre of the farm, which is good, because when the animals then have to travel, when they're heavily in milk or in cage, they don't have far to travel to come into the shed or into the milking parlour. So in '99 we moved the goats up to the farm in March 1999, and so we started milking. We were still, the cheese building still wasn't finished, so we were still going up and down between Meg and Derek's. But in 2000 then we had the end of '99 we had the cheese making facility and all up on the farm. We have 3 different types of goats. We have the Saanen, which is the white goat. 50% of our herd are Saanen goats. They're very good because they give a lot of volume, they give a lot of milk. But we actually crossbreed them with the Anglo-Nubian and the Toggenburg, because those 2 breeds are very good for the fat content. And it's the fat content you want when you're making cheese. So by crossbreeding we get good volume with a good fat content. We have learned a lot over the 15 years. It makes you very much aware, what nature is about, because when you think you have everything in control, something else goes on, either with the climate or the animal gets sick or something happens, or we have, as I say, that fine weather we had last year. It is very unpredictable. Farming is very unpredictable. I don't know, are many of you farmers here in the room? Hands up. Yeah. So you know about the unpredictability of it. And it very much, climate has a huge effect on the animals. And the amount of time, having to keep them indoors. Our goats are, prior to last summer, they had been practically indoors for most of the previous year, because it started raining end of September and it kept on raining until the middle of June. And the goats don't like rain. So we were delighted, them and the goats were delighted to get out. They always have access to get out, but if it's raining, goats will not naturally go out in the rain.
So you have animals that don't like rain, don't like cold, don't like sun.
They don't like extremes, I suppose, in the west of Ireland, yeah. But as I say, they're like humans. They're like humans. So we do have them. I mean, they're inside at the moment. We will hopefully get them out now once Easter gets fine. But the land has to be dry because they're susceptible to foot rot, and that then leads to problems. And then, as I said, a sick goat is very hard to recover. We still have to be sensible about it. I have 6 employees. The goats and them are my concern, that I can keep them in a job in West Clare where there aren't many jobs. And so you have to be practical about things. You can have ideal notions, but if you have to run, a business that can pay people their wages and have a comfortable living for ourselves, you have to be practical about certain things, and sometimes you have to make compromises. So sometimes we have to have the goats in. People think that because you have goats and because it's an organic farm that they're going to be outside all the time, but they won't. You have to take animal welfare into consideration. So they have to be in for a lot of the year. But in our case, because of the farm, the sheds are very big, so it's not an intensive farm. So we have a herd of 200 goats, but over the last 15 years we've increased the shed size 3 times. So they've it's very spacious. There's fresh straw bedding put down every day. When they are indoors, if it's the summertime, we can get out and cut the fresh grass. So they're actually eating the fresh grass, even though they mightn't be out in it sometimes, but they're still getting the fresh grass. In the winter time, then we're feeding them hay and haylage. We milk the goats twice a day, in the morning and evening time. The majority of our kidding starts at the beginning of February and goes on till the end of May. We try.
Can I just pass from one of your cheeses? It would be a nice idea because you're getting
Getting
people.
carried away.
Yeah, no, you're good.
We try to spread out the kidding, because when you spread out the kidding, then you will have more even milk production throughout the year. As Helen will agree with me, there is a shortage of goat's milk in the country. But the shortage is in the autumn, winter and early springtime. Because up to, as I was discussing with Helen earlier, up to 2 years ago, I had goat farmers ringing me in the middle of the summer, kind of June, July, pleading with me to take their milk, because they were producing milk and they had no market for their milk. Now, unfortunately, at the time that they were ringing me in June and July, I was at peak production myself. So it wasn't the time that I needed milk. So, and I know a lot has been in the press and the media since last autumn. A lot of the press picked up on the shortage of goat's milk and thus goat's milk cheese in the country, and it being a European problem. But what they forget to emphasise, like some of the government agencies who ran goat milk courses, the shortage is in the autumn and the winter time and the early spring. And some farmers just went in. Naturally, goats or animals will kid in the springtime, so then they would have milk until the October time. So it needs quite, amount of knowledge and understanding how to get your animals to kid in later on in the year to have the milk when the milk is demand. And nobody wants to produce, no farmer or no chef or anybody in production wants to produce product that is going to be thrown away. And I literally had farmers saying, please take the milk, because if you don't take it, it'll be thrown away. And I couldn't take it because it was the time of the year I was at full production myself, so I couldn't produce it. And a number of farmers, I think about 3 or 4 of big farmers and goat farmers in the country have actually gone out of business because they were producing milk at the wrong time of the year. And there's a number.
Can you tell the audience about the cheese for 2 seconds?
The cheese, that might help me. So this, the cheese I handed out to you there, I can cut up with the whole farming side of it. This is our St. Tola log, which is the original product I suppose that St. Tola is most well known for. It has got some mould on the rind, which is safe to eat. It's a nice blue mould, as will appear as the cheese matures. This is a soft cheese. It's a 5-day process, but then we hold it on to mature it. So what you're tasting there is 3 weeks old. We make milk in the peak time from April now till September. We make cheese 5 days a week. And what we do is the texture of the cheese is quite light and creamy. People are surprised when they taste St. Tola goat's cheese compared to cheeses that they're used to tasting on the continent. First of all, they're surprised at the texture of it, because it's light and creamy in texture. It's similar to ice cream texture as opposed to toothpaste texture, which is pastier. The reason for that is because in St. Tola we actually hand fill the moulds. So we scoop, when we have separated the curd from the whey, we actually have ladles, literally like a soup ladle, stainless steel, that we fill in the moulds. So the less you interfere with the curd, the less it'll stay light and fluffy and creamy. So by hand filling, you keep that light and creamy, mouldy, light fluffy texture. Also in our cheese, we only use 1% salt, and the average in goat's cheese would be somewhere between 3 and 4% salt. The more salt you add, the longer a shelf life it will give you, and the more it will preserve your cheese. But it will also affect the flavour of the cheese, and we're not looking for, we want to bring out the natural flavour as much as possible. So that's why we use so little salt, not just for the health benefit, but also because of the natural flavour of the cheese. So it's not killed or decreased by the salt content. We use sea salt. We mature the cheese. What we have seen, like every business, things have got more competitive. Like when Megan Derrick started off, they were the only goat cheese maker in the country. Now I think we've got 10 goat cheese makers in the country. And then obviously there's a lot more cheeses coming in, because the market has developed so much, and people's tastes and the Irish consumers' tastes have developed so much. We specialise in maturing our cheese and keeping it on to maximum of the slug we tasted there now, and that's 3 weeks old, up to 5 and 6 weeks depending on level of maturity. Your natural moulds will develop. We develop a geotrichum, and can you see from that? I'll just hold it up. It's kind of little squiggles, as monkey brains as people call it. It's kind of these little squiggles on the rind. This is a natural rind that develops on our cheese, and it was one of the things we were concerned about when we were moving from Megan Derrick's cheese house up to our cheese house. Would we get this to naturally develop? So we took every bucket, stool, spoon, every utensil up to the building and left it sitting there before we opened up for about 6 months, so we would get the natural bacteria, the good bacteria, to grow in our cheese house, and to get these monkey brains, as it's known, or geotrichum in the cheese industry. And I mean, the first time we made the cheeses, and we were just there, we were looking and we said, please may it appear, because it's not something that you can manufacture. It's a natural thing that develops. And you can help it develop in that we get I suppose a lot of experience from France and advice from France, because they are the home of goat's cheese making. So we travel over there, at least once a year, and we work closely with a network of goat cheese makers over there. So we did bring over 2 special chambers. They look like fridges, but they've got their humidity and temperature control armoires, what they're called, but they look kind of like fridge, like armoires, and they help bring out the even development of the geotrichum in the cheese. But because it's a natural cheese with a natural rind, it does change from when you first get it to, however long you leave it in the fridge. So you will have this natural rind developing, so you have a yellow golden colour, and then you will have these moulds coming on, but they're good, they're fine, they're good. And you can eat them, or some people don't eat them, you just cut off the rind.
Can you pass around the mouldy one?
Yes, yeah.
There's more mouldy
This one, well, this is more mouldy because of its, this is our ash log. This we've just been producing. We're going into our second year producing this. This is our St. Tola ash log. This is the one that's been getting a lot of attention in the last year. The lads in the cheese house always go mad, because usually in January, when we do not have a lot of production, because we don't have a lot of milk, when it be kind of a downtime, a lull, I start coming up with ideas, and they say, oh no, Siobhan, please, can we not just do what we're doing? I said, no, you've got to be coming up with something new. So this is the St. Tola ash log. Basically, our fresh log, after 5 days, we roll it in a food grade charcoal that we actually bring over from France. So it's black soot. If you're in the cheese sauce on the day we're going the cheese, basically there's black soot on your hand and on your apron everywhere. So we just roll it in the cheese, and then we leave it to mature for at least 2 weeks before we would sell the cheese. The other log you tasted earlier, that could be sold after 1 week, but be very quite fresh and light and wouldn't have that natural rind on it. But this cheese we have to hold for 3 weeks. So it goes from a very jet black to a more greyish white in colour. What we have found is the actually a natural preservative. So it helps keep the cheese, keeps the flavours in the cheese. A cheese naturally dries out and the moisture evaporates as it matures. But the ash log and the charcoal helps keeps in the moisture, so it keeps the cheese lighter and fresher for longer and keeps the cheese from drying out. So it's the St. Tola ash log.
What type of shelf life would it have then?
This would have 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
Well, this is what we have to officially say. But
Yeah.
you can eat we eat the cheese much longer. We just get, I mean, even though what we produce are soft cheeses, I mean, if you kept this, say, for 3 months, it would be hard, and you could grate it. You know, you could still grate it, but as a
Officially,
it's
yeah.
a 7-week-old cheese. We discovered that Indians used to use food grade chocolate has actually very good digestive qualities, and Indians used to always put charcoal from the fire into their cooking pots because to help with digestion. So this is the St. Tola ash log, which is it's a smaller log. It's a 500 gram log. It just rolled in the ash. It holds better than the 1 kg log, and that we produce. We also produce just in the last, I think, 3 years. It's basically our curd cheese. It's our fresh cream cheese, because what we had discovered as we were going in and out to kitchens, chefs, we were going through hand lading, putting our cheese in mould, holding it for 5 days, taking it out, smoothing down the edges, and making it all look lovely and moulded. And then it was going into restaurants, and the first thing the chef was doing was smashing it all up and breaking it all up again. And when I actually physically saw this happen one day, I said, God, this is madness. We're going through all this kind of looking after it. Next thing, it's coming into you and you're breaking it up and you're doing all sorts of other things with it. So what we actually started doing then was just getting the curd, the very fresh curd. We don't do anything different with curd. It's literally the fresh curd, and we just put it in tubs, catering size to the into the chefs, or these units that you would see in some of the supermarkets. That's basically just a fresh curd. So that is literally just 3 days old. And the chefs are using that in cooking, whether it be for starters or in desserts or something as an accompaniment in a main course. But just it was something, it was just practically from talking to chefs that we came up with. It's just, we call it the St. Tola Divine. So it's our cream cheese, our curd cheese. So they're the 3 different types of cheese that we make. We did, up to last summer, make a hard cheese, but because even though the summer was good, the lead up to the summer, the previous 9 months were not good. So milk production was way down on our farm. We were down 30% from milk production. So we didn't have any extra milk to make. Usually in the summertime is when we make our hard cheese, but there was no surplus milk last year to make hard cheese. So we don't. It's a Gouda style cheese. Hopefully we will get back to this summer, once the weather starts improving now come April and that, to make the hard cheese. We just make it in the summertime when the goats are out in grass. We find it just holds better as it matures along. That's the Gouda style, the hard cheese. But we haven't any of it, last of it went to Christmas time. Yes?
I understand that goats are quite selective in grazing. Do
Yeah.
you need a special, when you reseed a field, do you need a special mixture for reseeding? And the second question I have is, sometimes some goat cheese are very strong, and your one is very mild. So what makes a strong goat cheese and what makes a mild?
The reseeding issue, first of all, reseeding is very important. Unfortunately for us, last summer we did get to reseed. Ideally you should be reseeding, some part of your farm every year. Last summer we were able to reseed, we actually reseeded 40% of the farm, but we hadn't been able to reseed the previous 2 summers because there weren't any summers. So the land was too wet to reseed. We just, you see, we have natural herbs and that on the land anyway, so it's just natural reseeding. There aren't, it's just, because it's an organic farm, they have, what they don't like is rushes. But when it's natural and organic, they will eat everything else.
Try and get over that.
Yes. That's it. So, they like the natural herbs. They love clover. It's very good for them. Marigolds, buttercups. It's just your natural grasses. Now we do feed the animals when they come in to be milked twice a day. They are given grains when they come into the milking parlour, because you have to have a mixture of long and short fibre. So they're a mixture of grains that we give to the goats when they come in, and that's very important. That is very important. It's also very important that even when they're indoors, this sounds contradictory, they have to have plenty of access to water, because they need to drink a lot, obviously, like us humans should do as well, a lot of water. The second question about flavour, the strong cheese. Well, you see, the strength of a cheese really, one is to do with the type of cheese that you make. We make a fresh curd cheese. You'll be tasting some of Helen's cheese. Like have you washed round? No, you haven't. But your mature, hard cheese. Flavours have to do with the maturity of the cheese.
So the smelly goat cheese would be older than...
Would be older, yes, yeah. Or you could have a smelly goat's cheese that would be a washed rind cheese. Because washed rind cheese are naturally smelly by nature, because you're washing the rind. But a mature cheese is a strong smelly cheese is usually a mature cheese. And what I have noticed over the 15 years, when I was going out with Meg and Derek, first of all, doing tastings in stores and in shops, Meg would say, whatever you do, Siobhan, when you're tasting, don't tell the people, first of all, that it's goat's cheese. Because if you do, 90% of them will not taste it, So get them to taste, first of all. And then when they taste the cheese, then say, and at that time too, when we were doing it 15 years ago, it was always the mild cheese. The very fresh log, which was very mild in texture and flavour. And then when I started it 15 years ago, so first of all I wouldn't tell them it was goat's cheese. I'd say it was from Clare, and then I'd get them to taste, and then after they'd tasted it, then I would say, well, that's actually a goat's cheese you're tasting. And there would be surprise by everybody. And some people, now you'd always have a reaction at some people, who just don't like any type, type of cheese. They wouldn't have liked it anyway, even if I didn't say it was goat's cheese, because they'd say that before I'd say it was goat's cheese. Because I'd always get their feedback before I'd say it was goat's cheese. And then I would say, well, it's actually a goat's cheese. And then some people who had said, it was absolutely lovely, whatever. Once I said it was goats, they probably spat it back at me. And it's just this mindset, because a bit like you say about the smelly goat's cheese, if that's your experience of what you've tasted, and what a lot of people in Ireland associate when they think goat's cheese, they think of the smelly wild goat, the fairy goat, or in the winter time, and when goats, are wet and that, they are smelly. So they think of the animal, they don't think of the cheese. Yeah. Now, but over the years, I said, I'm 15 years now doing cheese tasting. Now when I'm tasting, it's mainly mature cheeses I'm tasting, because people don't want the mild cheese, because people's palates have developed so much. Yeah. They don't want a mild, bland, young cheese for tasting. I mean, you can use mild, young cheese, when you're cooking and doing things with. That's what the chefs use our different cheeses depending on what recipe they're using with it. But people want the strong, smelly goat's cheese.
Very much, Joseph. Siobhan, if I can get you to sit down, and we're going to get Helen to take over for the next part. Thanks very
Folly that, as they say. Well, we come from at the business from a completely different angle, in that we have a farm, but we don't milk. We don't have any milking animals on the farm. And I, in my previous life, worked in community development for 15 years or so, which is all about process and helping people to make decisions, and like things going on for ever and ever and ever and ever. And I always tell the story that like when I would go out and have lunch, that you kind of think about food and feeding people and how like you feed people, you clean up afterwards and it's a job done and everybody's satisfied, and there's something so fabulous about feeding people. So it was something that I always was very interested in and wanted to do, and just, my husband would say I should have picked an easier midlife crisis. I should have gone and bought the Harley and we could have sold it again. But I didn't. I decided I wanted to get into a food business, so I looked around and there was a lot of people baking bread and making jam, and there wasn't that many people making cheese. I didn't really start out wanting to make cheese, I just started wanting to be involved in a food business. I went to visit Olivia Goodwillie, who was the only other cheesemaker in County Kilkenny at the time, and Olivia kind of looked at me and said, do you really want to do this? And I kind of didn't listen to her either, and I carried on, because I had started experimenting at home in the kitchen myself. And cheese making is one of those things that is completely addictive, because it's quite scientific. I had no science background whatsoever. I mean, if you weren't good at maths with the nuns, you didn't get to do science, that was it, because it involved going across to the CBS boys' school to do science, so you weren't allowed there unless you were really, really serious about it. So I had no science background whatsoever, here I was involved in making a product that really needs a lot of kind of science behind it. But I started to make a batch, and like our first cheese was quite edible and nice, and I kind of made another one and made another one at home in the kitchen with pots and pans. And Tom and Elizabeth Bradley from Carlow, we were all kind of doing the same thing at the same time. Elizabeth was a bit ahead of us. She had made cheese with Olivia before, so she showed me how to make it, and then we did a course together. Leader in Kilkenny put on a course that we attended, and it just took on from there. We had a very good inspector who we converted a back kitchen of our house, a dairy inspector, and they don't get a lot of good press, but he was really, really good. He kind of turned a blind eye to some things that didn't quite match up. Like you have to have a drain in the floor, but this was like our house is an old farmhouse and the floor is not straight, right? So the drain was here, but the floor was going the opposite way. So to slosh the water out at the end of the day was a bit of an event. So things like that he kind of he helped us out. We began then selling at the farmers market in Carlow. And I began by first making a goat's cheese, because at the time there was a huge interest in goat's cheese, and it was my favourite type of cheese, and I just really loved goat's cheese myself. And when we started selling at a farmer's market, there were a lot of people coming to ask me who liked goat's cheese, also wanted sheep's cheese, and again because of dairy allergies and all of those kind of things. So we managed to source some sheep's milk, and we started to make sheep's cheese. And then another evolution happened in that Olivia decided she wanted to stop making Lavistown, and we actually made some extra cheese for her for Christmas, and then she decided she wanted to stop altogether. So we actually bought her business from her and started to make Lavistown cheese. So that's ended up with us making a whole lot of different types of cheeses. They're all basically the same, in the sense that they're either soft or hard. We use the same equipment, but it's how we treat the different cheeses that brings about the different products in the end of the day. So we have a soft cheese. All of our soft cheeses are mould ripened, so they have a white mould that grows on the outside. So that's a camembert or a brie style. So we have one curing room where we have that bacteria growing. Our other cheeses then are all we developed them, the harder cheeses, by washing the outside of the rind. And we started off, it was one of the things Bill Hogan, who did that very first course with us, was telling us about how the monks use wine and stuff to wash their cheeses with, and it starts to develop a particular kind of rind. So we started to use an organic white wine in washing the cheese, and that became our kind of signature, if you like, really, for the different type of cheeses. So they all have this, if you can see that, this kind of yellowy colour on the outside, which has to do with the yeasts in the wine creating a certain level of bacteria in the curing room. And they're also a bit white as well, because the penicillin from this room creeps into this room. No matter what you do about it, it gets there. It's a bit like Siobhan's story with the geotrichum. Like when you get that environment working, you just want to hold on to that for dear life, because that's what's your signature, and that's what's giving you the particular kind of flavours. So when we took over, for example, the production of Lavistan, I went to all this trouble of building an extra curing room, because Olivia's cheese had a distinctive black kind of grey coat on the outside. And we built an extra curing room, put in a compressor, went to all this trouble, and followed her recipe to the T, and lo and behold, we still had yellow, white lines on the outside of the Lavistan. So we gave up on that one. But what we do hold on to is whatever is in the curing room, you keep in the curing room. And it's a bit of a battle in today's environment, where there's, on the one hand, like hygiene is hugely important when you're making cheese, because you're growing bacteria, and you want to make sure that you're growing the right bacteria. So at certain stages in the process, everything has to be absolutely, sterilised to the last and all the rest of it. But then you go into the curing room, where you're not sterilising things, and you're kind of bowing and scraping and saying, please keep going the way you're going. So it's kind of a bit of a dilemma, and you're always trying to keep those rooms healthy, because you do get rogue moulds from time to time. Like sometimes you'll have black moulds, you don't really want black moulds. Again, there's very few moulds that are going to make you sick, very, very few, but some of them don't look that great, and they might give you a little bit of an off taste in the cheese that you don't want to have growing there as well. So that battle of keeping the curing room right is really important from our point of view. I suppose I should pass around a bit of cheese. Okay, the first one I'm going to pass, I have only one tray now, so and if there's not enough, we can cut up some more. I'm not sure if I'll cut them up. So the first cheese that you're going to taste is the first of this year's sheep's milk. And the sheep's milk is very seasonal, because milking sheep in Ireland is quite alien to Irish farmers. There's only, I think, 3 or 4 dairy herds in the whole country. The milk we buy from Henry Clifton Brown in Cashel, and he uses, most of his milk goes into the production of Crozier Blue, which is made by Cashel Blue, make Cashel Blue and their sheep's version, which is Crozier Blue. Sheep's milk is highly nutritious. It has double the amount of fat, protein, calcium, all the vitamin groups as cows or goats. So it's a very, very dense product. The reason I think that people would find it easier to digest is that it's similar to cow's milk in that to goat's milk in that the structure of the milk is small. So for example, when you're making the cheese, we don't have the fat naturally coming to the top. The fats are naturally homogenized into the milk, and I think that's why people maybe find it easy to digest, because and it's a very wholesome food. I mean, really good, obviously, for young children, and because it has twice the amount of calcium as another kind of cheese. That is just 2 months, so it's very young, but it has, a nice bit of flavour going on there. I think you can maybe get the flavour of the rind washing. There's a little bit of that smelly cheese taste, but that is the mildest of what I'm going to give you to taste tonight. We mature on that for we've only ever matured it on for up to 9 months, because we start making cheese in February. There's only one single herd, so he doesn't have a winter herd and a summer herd. So the lambs are born, the milk starts, and then we finish in August. So it's only whatever we can get made between now and August is what we have available. So we've never managed to hang on to any for longer than about 9 months. Usually it's February, like the last of last year's is sold just as we start to make the next year's production. So that's the sheep's milk.
Which one is this called?
It's called Knockdrinna Meadow. Does anyone want to ask anything? Interrupt me as I'm going along. Feel free.
These are both the same.
Yeah, they're both the same.
They're both the same, yeah. So the next cheese, this is Knockdrinna Gold, and this was kind of the first cheese that we started to make. We started to make a hard goat's cheese initially. We started to make a camembert in the first room that we were in, and it's really interesting. We could not get the cheese not to have blue mould no matter what we did, and we had built a separate curing room, we had put in a compressor, we had plastic coated the walls, we'd done all of that, but still every time we tried to make the camembert we had blue mould, and Irish people don't like the look of blue mould on their cheese. If we were selling the cheese in France it would be absolutely fine, but because
We charge 3 times the price.
charged 3 times the price.
Because we're feeling Catholic guilt because we've got mould in our cheese.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So then we started to make this hard cheese as well, and we had a little 150 litre vat, and we had 2 axe handles on the wall with a weight on the bottom, and that was how we pressed the cheese. Because with a hard cheese you're pressing out more of the moisture to give you that kind of harder consistency, and obviously the more moisture you press out of the cheese the harder it gets. So this one actually is 9 months old, so this is the last of last summer's production. The shortage of goat's milk is a huge issue for us. We think we have found somebody to supply us now, but so we're still selling the last of last year's milk. Because one of the issues internationally that's happening, I'm going to pass that along, so this is Knockdrinna Gold, is that the Chinese market has developed a demand for goat's milk to go into their baby formula. So that's taken a huge amount of goat's milk out of the French market. So there's a shortage right across Europe because there's so much going to China. That's nothing got to do with the shortage in Ireland. The shortage in Ireland has to do mainly with the processors in Ireland and how the thing is. It's not very well organised. There isn't a co-op. There's no co-op structure. So I mean, it is difficult for the farmers, because if they do have a surplus, they don't have. It's not like they can say to Lambia, here, take the extra milk off me. There's nobody there to take the extra milk. So it makes it more difficult for somebody to start off in goat's milk production. So I keep saying to them that's what they need to do. They need to form a co-op and take control.
Can you use frozen milk, Helen?
You can use frozen milk for soft cheese, I think. It doesn't work so well for cheeses that you're going to mature on. And the very same rules apply, as Siobhan was saying, like the quality of milk, and particularly summer milk and grass-fed milk, will always make the best cheese. And if you're going to mature on a cheese at all, it really has to be from summer grass-fed milk, because silage which is what is used in Ireland mainly to feed in the winter time, produces problems in the milk. There's a bacteria that can come in with the silage and it causes blowing in the cheese. So like even Irish factory cheeses are not made, they don't make cheddar in Ireland in the winter, they only make it in summer. Because there's too many issues. And anyway, the milk now is too valuable, winter milk is too valuable to go into hard cheese, any kind of hard cheese in Ireland. So that's Knockdrinna Gold. It's still quite soft even though it's 9 months old. The rind is kind of nice and nutty.
Did you say gold or goat?
Knockdrinna Gold. Yeah.
It's goldsmith.
But it's gold. But it is goldsmith. Yeah. So that's the goat's milk. Last year we were trying to work out, I think it was Marion Flannery who said to me, what are you going to do for Savour Kilkenny? And I met with Seamus O'Hara from the Carlow Brewing Company, and we were just chatting and I said, well, why don't we try a beer washed cheese? Again, going back to the idea that washing cheese with alcohol, we were already washing with white wine, and it was kind of a natural transition to try washing with beer. And I had made a recipe before which was based on what the Trappist monks made, like because the Trappists were great at all of that, like making beer and using the beer with the cheese, and making using the whole thing together. So we made our first cheese for the Savour Kilkenny Festival, and it really took off. There's been a huge interest in it, and I think the whole growth of the craft beer industry is great. And so the cheese is washed on the outside with the craft beer. This batch that you're going to taste now is washed with O'Hara's. We've used O'Hara's and we've used 8 degrees. And we have found that only one tray now, might need to cut up some. Oh great, well, good one. So this one is the strongest of what you're going to taste. So you can see when it comes around here, you'll see that it's soft and squashy. It matures from the outside. So it matures from all cheese matures from the outside into the middle. It starts with the rind and then works its way in. So you can see that how the yeast and the bacteria on the outside of the cheese are starting to rot, so it's softer there. And that softness will eventually work its way right into the middle, and it would eventually, if we left it there for probably about 4 months, it would just become a really strong puddle on a plate. Like it would just be all the fats and the proteins would be broken down by the rind on the outside, and it's the yeasts in the beer that start that whole process going of breaking down the fats and the proteins.
Is that goat's cheese as well?
No, this is cow's milk, because you can see it's a completely different colour to the goats or the sheep's. So sheep's and goats are white, and cow's milk is very yellow, and that's because cows absorb carotene from the grass and sheep's and goats don't. So that's why and in particular you notice that Irish cow's milk products are very yellow in colour, and that's why they're so popular, because they have that beautiful rich yellow colour. Because a lot of other cows would not be fed grass at all, they'd be fed corn or meal or other substitutes. So like the butter in France. The butter in France is a very pale colour compared to Irish butter.
Is that why?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the feed, the way the animals are fed it's a completely different regime altogether.
Well, you see more and more some products grass-fed, made from grass-fed.
And like it's only in the last couple of years that Ireland are actually shouting about that.
Finally.
It's something we've been saying for years and years and years. But anyway, they're catching on.
Do you have a question, Inga?
Yeah. What's that one called?
That's called Brewer's Gold.
Brewer's Gold.
There you go.
Tell us about your one second.
How old is that?
That is 2 months. 2 months. So it's ready in 6 weeks, and it can go on for about 4 months, but it gets progressively stronger as it goes on.
Goes out the door.
And stink, like really smelly. Yeah. We wash them 3 times a week for the first 3 weeks. So they're washed and turned 3 times a week for the first 3 weeks. So it's quite a labour-intensive job. And we hire a load of students and get them to do it. No, we don't. No, it's always it's always a job that's kind of, you know, okay, who's going to do the washing today? Yeah, yes. It's a tedious job. Yeah.
You have a cheese, don't you? That's the raw milk. Is that yours?
No, we don't make any raw milk.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They're all pasteurised cheese.
Yeah, we pasteurise all our cheese, and we pasteurise because I buy in the milk, and for me, I just felt I wanted that control, like when it came in the door to me, that I was, you know.
So you pasteurise it?
I pasteurise it. Yeah, we pasteurise it. Now we batch pasteurise, which means that it's pasteurised. It doesn't go through a plate. It's pasteurised in the vat. So it's a very slow heating process, because a lot of people would say that our cheeses taste like raw milk cheeses, and I think that that's maybe why, because it's a very gentle milk as opposed to, you know, backing it through the plate. So it's heated to 65 for 30 minutes.
And it's not homogenised then, it's just...
It's not homogenised, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not homogenised. And that, I suppose that's the thing that it can be difficult for customers to understand, is that there will be variations in the cheese from one end of the year to the other. Because even if you think about it from nature's point of view, like if an animal is born, a baby is born in February, March, April, when the animal is born first, the mother is going to be doing her best to feed that animal, so she's going to have milk that's really, really rich, lots of fat in the milk, because the baby needs to get going. So that's what you're dealing with. If you're making cheese then with early lactation milk, you've got lots of fat in the milk, and you've got to try and adjust your recipe. But your cheese is going to be a little bit different at that time of the year. And then you get into free flow milk in the summertime, and again when the grass is growing and everything is lush and green and there's loads of milk flowing, that's when the best cheese is made. And then you move on to late lactation milk at the end, so you're coming to where mommy's getting ready to have the next baby, so get the last bit of intensive milk into the baby, so you have really high fat milk again at the very end. So you're trying to balance out those differences, and there are variations in the cheese. Like they can be, if there's a lot of fat in the milk, the cheese can be softer, and if there's a lot of humidity in the air, the curing rooms can be a bit, you know, damper, and we don't, like, everything is not controlled as it is in Glanbia, like where they standardise and homogenise absolutely everything, so your cheddar is the same all the time. Like, it just can't be the same all the time. There have to be variations in it. And I suppose maybe it's about celebrating those variations, and I think once people understand it, they're fine, you know.
I just wondered, what's the best temperature to keep cheese at home when you bring it home?
Well, it depends on how long you want to keep it. I mean, if you keep it at 4 degrees, it's going to last longer. But you should definitely take it out for a couple of hours before you eat it. Like if you buy cheddar in Lidl and leave it out of the fridge for 2 or 3 hours, it's going to taste so much nicer than if you just take it straight out of the fridge. Because if it warms up to room temperature, you get all those lovely, the fats and the proteins and everything kind of coming together and homogenising them, you know, they just naturally do that. Whereas if it comes straight out of the fridge, you just don't get the same amount of flavour. Now if you leave your cheese out of the fridge, it's going to naturally mature on. So, like, we would cure our cheese at 12 degrees. So, and while it's at 12 degrees, it's maturing on, so it's developing and it's developing. So if you leave the cheese out of the fridge, it's going to get stronger. It's not necessary. It will eventually go off, but it's not necessarily going to go off if you leave it out of the fridge. I mean, cheeses would traditionally have been left in like a pantry or whatever, where you know the temperature might have been 8 or 9 degrees or 10, you know, that kind of temperature, and that's probably a good temperature. But it's not so easy in our houses to find.
So when you buy cheeses from the supermarket and you take it out of its own packaging, is there a way that you can package it yourself, or is there wrapping it in paper?
Again,
or-
it depends on the type of cheese. Like different cheeses behave differently with different kinds of packaging. I mean, when you have it in the fridge is a really dry environment, so you have to stop it from drying out. So even though wax paper is lovely, realistically, your cheese will dry out. So if it's a hard cheese, like I would think cling film is still good for hard cheese, but the softer the cheese is, then the worse it behaves in cling film, if you know what I mean, because it sweats and it makes it all gooey and not nice on the outside. So if you have some kind of greaseproof paper or waxed paper for soft cheese, I mean usually those, if you buy a brie or something like that, it will come in a paper, and I'd say keep it in that paper.
But sometimes you can get the soft cheese in the shop, they give it you in cling film. Take it out
of cling film, yeah, because they just sweat in cling film.
Be like wrapping yourself up on cling film. It wouldn't look too good after a couple of hours. Because it's the same, because it's a live, living organism, so it needs to breathe.
And all of those papers that, like the good paper, like the cheeses papers that we would sell our cheeses in, are breathable papers,
porous.
so they are allowed. And then blue cheese, definitely don't wrap it in cling film. In tin foil is good for blue cheese.
So you could safely take out some cheese this evening and still eat it tomorrow.
Absolutely. It's, I mean, it is a living organism. It's not like meat or something that's going to go rancid. It's doing what it does naturally. It's going to mature on.
Just bring it straight back in.
Where is your cheese for sale?
Downstairs. And your money in your pocket.
Do you use the whey for anything, like after you've finished with the curds?
We rear pigs from time to time. We don't do it all the time, and then the rest of it goes into the slatted unit on the farm, and it's spread on the land as fertiliser. I mean, the story of whey at the moment is just phenomenal. It's taken over as a commodity now. In fact, cheese is being made in our factories now for the whey.
Yeah, it's more valuable than
It is more valuable than cheese. Like, it takes 10 litres of milk to make a kilo of cheddar, and you can buy commodity cheddar on the market for €3 a kilo. Like, I can buy commodity cheese for €3 a kilo if I go looking for it. So they're selling cheese below the cost of production just to get the whey.
So the way it's going into protein drinks and
Drinks, baby formula, all of those kind of things. And it's why cheddar is so cheap in the supermarkets.
And that's why Glanbia has done so well in the last 5 years.
Yeah, because that's
They've built themselves up on their
on
way.
the way.
Powder.
But you can imagine, like, that cheddar cheese is on sale for €7 or €8 a kilo. Like, we can't even make the cheese for that price, not to talk about sell it at that price. It's just really skewing the whole notion of, what food actually costs to produce.
That's where stuff gets complicated.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Helen.
Don't know how I'm going to keep you interested after those two ladies. Tom Burgess, anyway, as you know, I make Coolattin cheddar, and I started as a dairy farmer. I had a degree in agricultural science, which had a kind of a food processing bent as well towards that. And I started dairy farming in 1987 outside Tola in West Wicklow, is where my farm is. And I was always very interested in milk production and grass-based milk production, and interested in feeding the cows on grass and that whole line of managing grass for a dairy herd. And the dairy cow calves, the herd calves in January, February, the spring, and starts producing milk then and gets out, and we try and coincide that with the grass production on the farm, when grass starts to grow. And so really the target or the aim of the grass-based dairy farmer is to fully feed his cows on grass for the whole year, and we've kind of match the stocking rate and the calving days, the stocking rate and everything with the grass production on the farm. So they're eating grass all year. I was quite happy with that, but I was at it for about 10 years, and I was feeling a bit constrained by the milk quota system. I had more land than I needed, and I was trying to do other things like sheep production and tillage and that, but I found I wasn't really making any money on that, and around mid-90s I was getting a bit, as I said, frustrated, and I was casting about for other ideas, and I actually spent a year teaching chemistry and physics in the local secondary school and other things, but I decided I wanted to stay on my farm and employ myself on my own farm, so I looked at food processing and processing the milk into a product that people would appreciate and pay for. First I thought of ice cream, but then when I looked at it in detail, I realised it had too much cost in refrigeration and that, and there was already quite a lot of nice ice cream out there. And I looked at cheese then, and cheddar really seemed to be the one of choice. And when I tasted the raw milk cheddars from the UK, and Montgomery was one, and Mount Callan from County Clare, I was fairly smitten, and I really liked the taste of it, and I really was quite addicted to it. The way the flavour.
So raw is not necessarily ideology for you. It's more a reaction to this is how really good cheese tastes, or you just like the taste of that cheese.
Raw is about keep maintaining the quality of the milk of the initial product, the primary product, and getting that through to the consumer.
Okay.
So the grass-based milk, especially summer milk, when the cows are eating nothing else, during the year we do supplement with some silage and meal and that, this time of year and in the autumn. But really summer milk, they're fully fed on grass, and clover swards as well is quite an important part of it, and that has quite a big effect to have a good mix of grass and clover. So I wanted to process that and preserve that and be able to package it and bring it through to the consumer. So raw milk cheddar would preserve that flavour and the flavours from the milk without breaking it down, and I suppose if you think about a good wine, you wouldn't heat it up to 60 degrees like you would like a cup of tea or something. You wouldn't expect it to taste the same if you did that. So I believe raw milk was the way. It also fit well with my production profile and my farm, and it fit in with my calendar of work on the farm, and that I had time to go to do the cheese making during the summer months and stop in the winter. And I usually start in the end of June, when all the seasonal silage making, the calving and the serving of the cows is finished. So I'm still a dairy farmer, and I still do that sort of that work on the farm as well. I do have help. These things kind of get on top of you, and when you got too much to do, you have to look around and grab whoever happens to be there. So I have a full-time worker on the farm. I have about 110 cows, full-time worker, and I have during the summer I have a student in. Generally, I've had 2 different lads now, and they're ag students, which is they're doing the same course that I did in Belfield, so I kind of know them well and know what they're at and the way their mind works, and it's gone along fairly well. And it takes about 1.5 people in the cheese room on the day of making. Cows are milked in the morning, and milk is pumped directly into the cheese vat, and it's at just the right temperature to add the starter, which is 32 degrees actually. And the starter is added. That's the beneficial bacteria. Milk, as you may not know, is sterile, or is totally free of bacteria coming out of the cow, and the reason we have to pasteurize is because it's stored, and the factories have to leave it for 2 or 3 days, and it's actually more like 4 or 5 days before it's processed. So my milk is actually processed within half an hour of coming out of the cow. It starts the process. The starter goes in, it starts working, the acidity builds up, after about 50 minutes, when all the milk is in the vat, we add the rennet. That sets it into a jelly, and the rest of the process is like the other cheesemakers. After 50 minutes of rennet, the jelly is cut with the cheese harp, and we start heating it and we scald it. Now that's when cheddar is slightly different, and I scald it to 40 degrees, which is quite hot, and the curd hardens up into a harder product than these soft cheeses here, and we can treat it a bit more roughly. And after that 2 hours of scalding, it goes down into the cheddaring table, and the cheddaring process itself proper happens there. The acidity is allowed to rise. Bacteria work for about another hour. Acidity rises and we measure it, titratable acidity, and it rises up to a certain level where we target level at a certain rate of rise, and then we mill it, we add salt and put it into the cheese moulds and put it into the cheese press. So it's quite a nice day's work, about 8 hours from start to finish, and the process well worked out.
When we used to make our cheese, we, like yourselves, we have students come during the summertime. We get French agricultural students, and they always say to Siobhan, is it called hard cheese? Because it's very hard to make. Not necessary, but yes.
The wheels. Yeah, it's heavy work. The wheels are 17 kilos when we make them, and we have to carry them out. We make about 10 or 12 of them, and the press work sounds like weightlifting, and it is like weightlifting when they actually do it, and you have to take them out and turn them over and put them back in, and then you take them out 2 days after making and bring them into the maturing room, let them dry off, and we put our cheese coat on them. Now cheese is different from these washed rind ones, because as I explained to you, it is an acid cheese, and it's cheddar. I mean, cheddar I make is acid cheddar. So the bacteria that you have on the washed rind and the trichotillomania, whatever they are, and all these more grow, and we don't get these, and cheddar makers don't actually aim to have a mould ripened or a rind on their cheeses, because it just doesn't work because of the acidity. You do get some moulds growing on it, but it takes ages, and so I use and there is a kind of two schools of thought about this. The traditional way of coating cheddar is cloth bound. You're probably all familiar with that. Mm-hmm. And you get this kind of heavy canvas, and you put a strap around the cheese, and you coat it then with lard, and heat up the lard, and you can put it on with a pallet and cover it over and that. And it's pretty awful looking stuff after a month or so. It actually does really grow a lot of mould, and I just didn't find it that desirable, and myself, So my cheese is actually we painted with a cheese coat, and this is a wedge of the cheese, and that's the cheese coat here. I picked red. I suppose going back a step, before I started making it, I spoke to the first lady was Helen, and all the other cheese makers, and I actually sold it in the market stall for a couple of years before I actually had my own product to sell, and I found that people, I figured that people would look at this red one that stands out, something that looked better in the crowd, and say, what's that? Let's have a taste of that. So that was what I did, and I stuck with this for a long time, and there was a lot of resistance to it actually. Even the slow food people like yourselves here, some of you are involved with, didn't really like it, and they wanted to go for the traditional one, but it just practically, and I'm a very practical person, and it didn't seem to figure that it wouldn't work. One of the biggest problems with these slow, long-term maturing cheeses is mites. Now this is M-I-T-E-S. I've spoken to people about mites before, and I realised after a while that they thought I was talking about mice. But it's not mice. The mice are easy enough, but the mites are not as easy, and they get in, and they're okay on the outside, but they do kind of find their way into the wheel, and they discolour it, and they get this It's kind of a black colour, and they're very hard to control. And you'll see it in the aged cheeses. You'll see it on any cheese stall. The damage from mites, and you can't sell it. It doesn't taste that good anyway. The other thing, the blue, as we were talking about earlier, I have blue in that wheel there, and that's quite nice actually. That's quite edible. You can get a nice flavour from that, but not the black mite damage. That's really cut it out and throw it away. So the mites are a lot worse under the cloth bound rind, cloth bound cheddar. They get in there and they like it a lot more. They're a lot happier in there. On this, you can actually take this down and wash it and wipe it with a cloth and turn it over, and the mold comes off. And really, my theory is that it's the cheese and the milk inside that gives it the flavour.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what is it made of, the stuff that you coat it with?
Oh, it's a Dutch cheese coat that they have developed in Holland. It's edible. It's not wax actually. It's an edible kind of a paint. And,
it's cellulose acetate. It's an edible.
Thank you, Noel. Cheese expert. And it's well accepted on the Goudas and Edams in Holland. That's what they all use over there. I have actually given in to the cloth bound, and I have last year made cloth bound. And it's really just what I do with it after. Given into market pressure, let's say, and I've got a cloth bound cheddar now, which is the same cheddar, but it's just a different coat on the outside.
Does it impact the taste?
Sorry?
Does it impact the taste?
I'm not sure. I've been over to England to the British Cheese Awards, and I've spoken to the cheddar makers over there, and they're not sure either. The people who do it, obviously say they believe in it, and they say it does impact on taste. And the people who don't. There are some of them, like the more established cheddar makers do actually believe it. But there's some successful ones. The one that Helen, that Elizabeth sells in Carlow, what's that called, from the Jones Brothers, Lincolnshire Poacher, is actually painted or cheese coated, the same as mine. Now that's the Coolattin mature. The difference, as I said, this is long-term maturing. So I make it during summer months, and I put it in the maturing room. I keep it warm for warm meaning 10 to 12 degrees. In the summer, actually, I have to cool the room, and in the winter, I have to warm the room. And I keep it there for about 14 months before I sell it. So all the cheese I make in this summer won't be sold until August, September. This is 2012, July. So there's a long wait before, as long as stock. It's about 90 days I put on the packs, the vac pack keeps it quite well. If you don't let it dry out, it's really the problem is that it spoils is by drying it out, and it cracks and it gets very hard and hard to use. That's really the problem. It lasts indefinitely though, if in the wheel, if I don't cut it. Well, I won't say it lasts indefinitely. You do get mold, and you do get mites and things going into it. And you get more waste in the older cheese.
Sorry.
But that's yes.
I just want your timeline. So if you milk the cows, it
Yeah.
goes through the process in an 8
Yeah.
hour day,
Yeah.
and then you
I press it for 2 days
press it for 2 days, and then you put it
in
in
the maturing room.
Yeah.
And we put the cheese coat on. It takes another 2 days to do that. Just slap it on and turn it over the next day and put it on again.
And then you just leave it?
So we leave it there, and we turn it over about every 2 months. Well, the earliest stage, we turn it over once a day for a week. We're nearly there by the time it's painted. And then once a month, and then every 2 months over the whole time that it's there. And we clean the mold off it as well. We keep the mold off it. That's what we aim to do. So we're talking about what's in our mind is the maturing, the breakdown of the protein in the cheese. In the milk protein breaks down into the casein, breaks down to amino acids and further small peptides, polypeptides, and right down into ammonia. And it's a chemical process, but it's a process of respiration, and it's about taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. And any plant that's growing outside does the same thing. It's a well-known process, and the cheese needs to be able to breathe to do that. If it's vac-packed, it can't do that. The oxygen can't get, the air can't get in, carbon dioxide can't get out, you know. So it's a kind of, in effect, it's decomposition of the proteins and fats in it, and they're breaking down. And the real flavours that you get are when you start getting ammonia out, which is the end product, the last product comes out of protein breakdown.
Do you have a reaction from customers who may be lactose intolerant that they're more capable of
Yes,
digesting
I
their
do.
cheese?
Yes, I do. It's true. I have had some customers who, because cheese that's a year old or even 6 months old, the lactose has all been used up. The lactose is used up by the bacteria surviving the process. Will actually act on the lactose and acidify more and keep going with that. And the cheese that any bacteria that survive, as I said, survive the process after about it's been measured. I mean, we tested ourselves, but it's been measured. In generally, cheddar is one of the most examined types of cheese in the world. And, you know, the process has been made, really nailed down very well because it's the most common cheese in the world. But these harmful bacteria don't survive in cheddar. It's the acidity, the other bacteria, the age, beneficial bacteria that kill them. So you will have some level of it immediately after, in the first month, but 3 months later, it's quite safe. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture consider allow raw milk cheese if it's 60 days old, but not younger than 60 days old. So the younger softer cheeses are a different product.
So they're not allowed to sell them
in America. If they're raw milk, if they're soft raw cheese products are not legal in America.
Sorry, do you get extra tests and extra inspections and all that for because your milk is raw for your cheese? Or I do 2 annual TB tests. Normal farmers are doing 1, so I do a second one. Usually we do one before we start and one after we finish TB and brucellosis on the herd. The cheese itself we test for Staph aureus and salt content fairly soon after we process it, within a week. And then before we sell it, we test for salmonella and listeria. We take a sample from every batch. Every batch is what we made on a particular day. And the batch number is on the label. We have a kind of a traceability, we can go right back. The label, the batch number, the date of manufacture is the batch number. So we can go back if something is found. But I've never actually found anything. I kind of get a bit tired of paying for all these lab tests and they're all saying negative. We just have a list of negatives on the result. We'll say your herd then does fail a TB test, or one animal fails TB. Yeah. Does that mean you have to destroy all your cheese?
Well, we were kind of under the impression of that, but it actually happened, and we didn't have to destroy it. No. We decided there was a risk assessment done by the department, and if we didn't fail it, we had a doubtful, and we didn't have an actual reactor.
Because we're in an area that there's a lot of...
Yeah, when the animal was killed, they didn't have the lesions, and it is a risk, and this is why I didn't get into it bigger, because there is always that in the back of your mind that you might lose the whole year's production if it happens, But this is something that is arguable, and a lot of cheesemakers will stand up. Bill Hogan was the first man, the inspiration at the very beginning, who came up and gave us those classes, and he was a man who fought in the high courts actually. He was at risk of losing all his cheese because he had a reactor in the supply, and he won the case. And because it has never been proven that TB is spread in cheese, is transferred in cheese. In milk, fresh milk, yes, but not in cheese. The cheese making process, as I said earlier, kills these bacteria, kills these dangerous bacteria.
Tommy, you mentioned the cheddaring process. Is that something distinct from other cheese making?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the cheddaring process. It happens on the table, and we actually measure the whey, acidity of the whey coming out, draining out of the curds. The curds knit together, and we have them in big blocks. You probably may have seen photos of these big blocks of curd, and over the hour that we do that, we turn them and we stack them up and press them, and we measure the acidity of the whey. And if the acidity doesn't rise, then occasionally this happens, something goes wrong in the process, and if it doesn't rise, then that's a no-no, and that cheese is thrown out. Don't actually go further with it. But that's that's the difference with cheddar, and that's why it has that sharp taste that you get in it. You really had a bit of sharpness there. Did everyone get a taste of that? That cheddar, yeah. I have another one here. I think we'll go for the vintage, which is 2.5 years old. It's just got a much rounder flavour, or fuller, a more complex flavour.
Yeah, exactly.
And it takes a long time to sink in. You know, you have to taste it like wine. And what I mean by that is hold it in your mouth and breathe through your nose when you're tasting it. And it's the olfactory nerves that actually appreciate this flavour of good cheese.
It's softer in texture too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So this is in a different. I have them in batches. I have a maturing room for the recent one, and then I have a cold room for the cheese that I sell, and then I have another room for the cheese that didn't get sold, and it goes to 2.5 years old, and this is vintage. And this is a more premium product, and I do sell it, but it's at a higher price than a few smaller. It's a much smaller amount of it for sale.
What's the premium for you?
Oh, it's about €3 a kilo. The retail, recommended retail, well, the price I get around locally, but a little bit dearer in Dublin, but it's €20 a kilo for the mature Coolattin, and €25 a kilo for the vintage.
I thought you have to sit on the stock for.
I have to wait for another year. Yes.
Is it just certain cheeses that you choose, or is it just?
No, well, to be honest, what I go into for a fresh and new batch, when I'm selling the cheese, I pick the best one that's there, at whatever stage it is, and I taste them with my cheese iron, cuts a little core out, and I taste them, and some of them do have bitterness, and they've other problems and they're not selling well.
You just
and I just leave them there and wait, and I come back 2 months later and they're fine. The bitterness goes. It's part of the cascade of protein breakdown. Some of the peptides have bitterness, and you just leave them, and it'll break down further. They will break down further, and bitterness will go. So really, you have to be patient, I think, if you're getting into cheese making. Sorry, if you're getting into cheddar making. I think. Siobhan and Helen are getting money a lot quicker than me.
I spend it a lot quicker. We are women after all.
Do have to.
Before one of them will make a comment.
So.
But it is like you have a lot of money tied up in your stuff.
An awful lot, yeah. That's what puts people off, as Montgomery said at one of his talks. You've got, all your stock. I make about 7 tons, fairly steady for the last 5 years. 7 tons of this, which is about 40 days of making.
Are you solidly then making for 40 days?
We make it 5 days a week for the months July, August, September, and that's what I found. We were talking about the right milk for the right cheese, and it's really just because I found they were the right months, and I always sell the September cheese quicker. That seems to come in better, quicker, and get to the right, to the right standard, and then I move back to the August and go back to the July. The July cheese is the last ones that I sell. And it's just, as I say, I graded myself. I picked the best one I could find to sell, and leave the restaurant to wait. The other stuff to wait. So,
where is the pressure coming from the government in terms of raw cheese? Because I've seen and heard reports, whereas raw milk is okay.
Yeah.
Raw cheese makers are starting to come under.
They are, yeah. I'm on. As I said, you have this kind of sword of Damocles hanging over you, wondering when is it going to happen?
What's driving that?
As Helen was saying, first of all, I want to say the department inspector that I had was very good. I had the same fellow as Helen, and he was great, very encouraging, good suggestions and everything, and he was brilliant. But just in the last 12 months or so, we had some people from, I think it was the health board, and they came in with a new test for, well actually I suppose going back a bit, it was And a strain of E. coli that caused a dangerous dose of diarrhea came up in Germany and some cheese, and they devised a test to find this, and it was called VTEC, and it was really a medical standard test, and they decided for some reason that cheese was going to be the risk properly, but actually when we look into it a bit more, we find it's probably more likely coming from the water supply, and more cases have come up from washed salads than they have from cheese. And a case comes up and you don't know what someone has been eating. Some child gets diarrhea and say, oh yeah, cheese, it must have been that. Or you could have picked it up from,
Well, it's. I mean, one of the things that is happening is that the E. coli bug is evolving. It is changing, and you remember that bean sprout situation where lots of people died, and that was because the E. coli actually managed to get itself inside the bean sprout, as opposed to being on the outside. So we're in a situation, we've created that situation ourselves by overuse and by, it's like MRSA or whatever, it's another symptom of that kind of situation. So now you have a situation where, okay, the E. coli bug is evolving. How is that going to impact on our food generally? Not just cheese, but because you make raw milk cheese, you're suddenly put up there as you're the one who's going to poison everybody. Whereas it could just as easily be a veg producer or coming from water. It does seem to be water is where the issue is evolving.
Yeah, it's kind of an acceptable standard that you heat treat everything you eat.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, 60 degrees or 62 degrees for whatever, some time, and then that kills every dangerous bacteria. It's accepted that it does, but it's even debatable whether that does or not. But the problem is humans are eating all this, sterile food. They have their resistance is dropped away to zero, and they can't actually fight against some bacteria that do survive pasteurization or sterilization. And they are there.
You can't think of anything safer than the milk coming straight from the cow and being processed straight away.
50 minutes.
That's.
Yeah. So.
But I think just a point of information, I suppose. In the United States, they did some work on bacteria in cheese, and they put all different types of bacteria into cheddar cheese, and they discovered that there was no bacteria, no pathogen they could find that would survive in cheddar cheese that was stored for more than 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So you need to
put it in there.
Into it.
It doesn't
It
survive.
would be there because it can't survive in cheddar cheese now. There's high salt, there's low moisture, and there's high acid.
Yeah.
So it actually kills any bacteria. And that's why cheddar is the most successful cheese around the world, because even before it was laboratories, people knew that if you stored it in the law in the States, that if your cheddar cheese is more than 10 weeks old, you don't even have to bring it to the laboratory, because it can't live in it.
Yeah.
Now the soft cheese are more risky, so that's why some people say that pregnant people shouldn't eat unpasteurized processed soft cheese, but they have no problem in consuming hard unpasteurized cheese.
Yeah. So you have some, there are some people who are slightly more at risk, some young children, very old people, pregnant people who might have it.
But that wouldn't apply to her.
Wouldn't even apply to hard cheese. Yeah. So there's one other cheese I have here that I was talking about waiting and running out of patience. So I've started smoking my cheese at about 6 months old, from 6 months on, and this is a younger cheese. So this is the cheese we made last summer, and I got into smoking. I got kind of looked into it. The Americans are big into smoking, and this actually takes very well to smoking. Works. So I went online and got my smoker and put that in. It's a mild smoke. It's more moist. The younger cheese is more moist. One of the effects of maturing is to dry it out. It gets drier. You lose weight. You lose. Well, they're beechwood chips. Beechwood chips. Yes, they've been identified as in taste tests that beechwood is the best. The one that people like most. I've tried other ones. I got some pecan chips from America, but just that I was reliably told that beetroot chips gave the best flavour for cheese. It's kind of a mild, just a very light smoke. I'm aiming to go light. When I tried first, it was tasted like it had been in the grate fire overnight, and well, it really wasn't. So you want nice smoke. We're just trying to enhance the flavour. Some of the cheesemakers actually pick out a bad cheese and smoke it. A good way to disguise a bad flavour. But,
You should ask Rod for some applewood.
Applewood, yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, applewood sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
A lot of it's in the perception, and the preconception of what you're eating, you know. So, I don't know if there's any more questions.
Grab a seat on the sofa and we'll spend a couple of minutes just talking to you. Thank you very much. Any questions left generally for any of the three cheesemakers while they're here and relaxing? No? We good? Absolutely sure?
One question.
No.
You mentioned Bill Hogan a few times there. Is anybody making Desmond and Gabriel anymore?
No.
Did you not hand that over to anybody?
Are you looking for somebody? He's advertising for somebody to take it. Yeah.
Why? What's the problem? Why is it not being made?
Explain the question to the rest of us who have no idea what you're talking about.
Bill Hogan made the best cheeses in Ireland, I think. Hard cheeses that remind you of Parmesan cheese, really.
Okay.
It's like Gruyere or anything.
It's fabulous, and I don't know why it's not been made since.
Which, well, Bill himself was ill, is no longer able to make it, and Sean, who was helping with yeast maker, he went off doing other things. So,
Okay.
And again, it's one of those cheeses, it would really need a dairy farmer to take it on who could afford, because like they're 2 years maturing.
I know.
So, you know, it's hard to start
It's a
off.
shame to lose that.
Yeah,
I
no,
thought it
you're
was
absolutely right.
So he's made an offer to anyone who has a genuine interest. He'll teach them, he'll carry them by the hand, he'll work with them for 12 months. He'll do whatever he can to make it happen.
And for somebody who might be interested, a dairy farmer who might be interested in getting into it, I can tell you it takes a lot of hard work and perseverance and patience to actually develop a cheese from the very beginning, bring in a brand new cheese. You know, these two, Gabriel and Desmond, are already developed as a brand, as a name. You know, and it is a valuable thing. There's another one, David Tiernan's cheese is there as well. The brand could be taken on and produced as well. It's going now as well.
that's
I don't know any more than that about it. But
that's why I was interested when Meg and Derek were retiring and had family, because they had the brand, the same Tola brand. It is very difficult to build up a new brand, and getting more difficult because there's something like 57 cheesemakers now in the country. There's an awful lot of cheesemakers. Phenomenal for the size of the country.
But there's nobody else doing what Bill Hogan is doing.
No.
yeah, very distinctive cheese.
Can I ask the three of you, one of the questions that comes up time and time again in terms of artisan producers who start off small and go to farmers markets and then start selling into independent retailers, and we have some independent retailers in the audience, and then scale again, and to get to the next stage of production and possibly to get to a viable income, they start considering or actively pursuing and stocking into Aldi or Lidl or SuperValu or Tesco or whomever. How do each of you, or how do you feel about that in the context of, one, the support for the independent retailers, and two, the environment in which cheese is sold in a large supermarket, which means you have none of the education or the explanation around variants in cheese happening. Consumers have to self-educate, which pretty much won't happen. And yet it seems to be necessary for artisan producers to do that, or they will never actually make a living.
Do you want to go first? Okay. Actually, sometimes I look back, because I'm actually supplying some multiples now. I'm supplying with these retail products, SuperValu and Tesco's. Now, the reason why I went into SuperValu, I went into because we were a small artisan producer. And sometimes I look back and say, I was probably much better off when I was just at that size. Because there's the small size, and I do believe Keith, you can actually make a living when you're a very, very small producer because you have much lower overheads and just doing your local farmers markets, and if you have a few good retail independents, if you're close you are to Dublin, the better you are. It's all about population, so, you know, so you can actually make a living when you were very small.
So micro essentially,
Micro.
At stage one,
Yeah,
stay there.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you step up.
And then you step up, but once you start stepping up, then it gets more difficult unless you take a real big leap.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different ball game then. But you have, I mean, there's about 6 cheesemakers who are up at that level you're talking about. Castle Blue, Cahill's, Coolini, Carrigaline, and Ruby, not Ruby, yeah. So we're at the middle stage. The reason why I went into the multiples because we were, you know, in the independent retailers, and that it's just that I didn't want St. Tola exclusive, you know, and a lot of towns and even bigger towns don't have, you know, specialty food shops, independent retailers. They don't. And then Superval that I started off with at the time, the majority of them are still very much owner managed. And there is, I mean, and obviously Superquinn was the first multiple I went into, and they had a great reputation for, you know, training their staff and all that. But as things got tougher and tighter, you know, training went out the window. But I mean, that can also be said in the whole food service area as well. Like before we went into the multiples, we were about 70% food service. But then
explain food service.
Hotels and restaurants, basically, cafes. But then when with the downturn the economy, there was also a downturn my customer in the food service, basically with the very, you know, the high end, the top to high end. And basically needs must, I had production, my customers, I was losing customers. I wanted also to get, as I said, I didn't want to just be exclusive to good independent retailers because they're not in other places. I thought Super Value was a good fit. I do produce a different type product because of it. You know, it's a different product.
Yeah.
It's not,
the branding is different.
Yeah, they're not my premium products, and there's a different brand.
Okay.
You know.
Are you devaluing yourself in some ways?
Pardon?
Are you devaluing or going down the, you know, your product is worth more than that, but packaging it and trying to get it around so money, do you have to make it cheaper? Like, are you losing out?
No, because the products, the two products I'm sitting in are different product. It's a different product. It's not bringing on your Geotricum, you know, you're maturing, you're handling. These are fresher products. And you had to, like, when we were going up to get, as I say, I have six full-time employees, you know, and I have to be in the multiples to be able to, I couldn't do that with food service alone. And because the type of cheese I produce, and because it's very natural, it isn't, and shelf life 7 weeks maximum soft cheese, it's not a cheese that can be exported all around the world, because of the shelf life. So this is, and then because, you know, with carbon footprinting and, you know, keeping things, you know, following the organic and natural route, sustainable route, I would prefer to be selling more with, you know, locally, than trying to export and fly, and the fuel costs and all the damage you do to the environment when you're the other side of the world. But I would tell people to tread very carefully when they're looking at going into the multiples, you know, because I started off with, I was always dealing with a number of them anyway, who were independent, who buy, and the good, say like your Super Values, they will buy directly off producers too, you know.
Yeah.
But then when you're going to central distribution, it's a whole different ball.
Your margin shrink, I assume.
Your margin shrinks, and there's a lot more of an investment in it, you know. Yeah, but it kind of depends on your level of production, where you want to go. But I mean, I would say to anybody kind of starting off in artisan cheese, you're better off starting very small first of all, and not try to bite off too much too soon. And the good thing about farmers markets and your local independent shops is that you get to do tastings, and you meet the consumer and the person, and they tell you, you know, what, you know, you see what, you know. So.
How have you tackled this, Helen?
I mean, we have some cheese in some multiples. It would be a very small part of what we do, and I'd much prefer it to be just in the independents. But we're in a population of 4.5 million or whatever it is. It's just too small. There's not enough. It's where you want to be. There's just not enough of it in the country. So unless you can export, you really have no choice. But to try and get there, you're kind of forced into it.
And does the available, sorry, Tom, before I get on to, are you purely independent or mixed?
It's purely independent. I supply directly to all the shops.
So you stayed in
all
that
my buyers.
stage one that
I
she
stayed,
wants?
yeah, I have just a very, yeah. I preferred to stay in sell it in the big wedges where the shop, sell it to a shop that cuts it in front of the customer. And that was really what I always wanted to stay. But I have actually started doing retail size packs and selling them to independents as well. I just find them a lot more work and a lot more hassle and for the same price, the same return. So I did dig my heels in to avoid, but really to grow my sales, I think I'm going to have to go that way as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just have to.
If I want to produce more cheese and make more out of it, take advantage. At this stage, I want to take advantage of the brand.
Yeah.
And the demand.
But there's
for
efficiency in size too, and cost from the business point of view. Because I mean, we were at a talk recently by Board B, a presentation that they made to us cheesemakers, and they were saying we need to a number of cheesemakers. You see, you're not cost effective because you have to make the initial investments, but unless you're producing a certain amount, you're not going to.
You're never pay back.
You're never going to pay it back,
Yeah.
So we have to increase in size, and as Helen said, because of where we're situated, we're in Ireland with a population of 4.5 million, whatever. So unless you're producing a cheese that can be exported with a long shelf life and that, you have, and it's not seen the same as the multiples. The multiples in Ireland are different than multiples in bigger countries with bigger populations. You still have the hands-on touch, with a certain number of the shops, and it is where people are purchasing, and you have to go where your customer is,
Is it buggering up the market for small-scale artisan producers when the top 6 cheesemakers are selling in volume into the multiples and the price point has reduced? So the perception of value is now skewed quite a lot.
It's a good point, really. I was asked at one point to produce for Aldi, and we had a long think about it because, first of all, we would have to buy a whole lot of new equipment. It would have been all we were guaranteed was 2 slots, right? There was no guarantee that you'd get any more than those 2 slots. So
2 orders.
2 orders, yeah. So we decided not to do it, but the temptation, when the volume that you're going to get from that, just even those 2 orders, it's obviously it makes a huge difference to their business to get that volume, because volume is what, unfortunately, volume is what makes money, and what gets you to that viability stage. I mean, I remember doing a course with the Enterprise Board in Kilkenny, and Blaze, the man who was running the course with us, goes, widgets through the system, and that's what you have to strive for. You have to do it as much as, it would be lovely to say only go to farmers markets and all the rest of it, but that's not sustainable either, because it's not sustainable even physically. To keep making and going out twice or 3 times a week, we did it for 4 or 5 years, and you just are absolutely burnt out after a period of time. You have to get to a point where you can employ staff and take some of the hard work out of it. Otherwise, it's it's not a labour of love anymore at that point.
But at the stage it is coming within the farmhouse cheese industry, and there's going to be even labelling issues. There is a difference between artisan cheese and farmhouse cheese.
Okay.
And this will be becoming more apparent within the market. Board B and Food Safety Authority are looking at labelling issues, because there is a difference.
So that's the paper that was sent out last week.
Yes.
Before last. Yeah.
So there's a difference between the larger scale processors.
Yeah. Good.
That are still selling as farmhouse cheese producers, but they're huge.
Just a comment on, I suppose even the way you can ask that question to me, so the language that you used, and then I listened to Siobhan as she almost apologised for the fact that she was selling her product in some of the mainstream markets. It is possible, and even Sarah from Cash and Blue talks about they're a large company, they supply all over the world now, even the States. And the attention to detail in terms of quality, she tastes all her cheese. Just to make a point, and it is possible to be large scale production, where you're actually selling right across the board. And I think it's also possible to be large scale and still be artisan. And that question of what is artisan is still a question that we've yet to answer. You know, and something else I would think that good food should be available for all. And the fact that I can now afford some very expensive cheeses that come on board once every 6 weeks and the likes of Bill and is fantastic. Because good food is available at an affordable price for all. You know, and Lidl and Aldi, for example, take very small margin compared to Tesco, I think 4% margin on any of our products. Whereas Lidl and Aldi will take, for those promotions, about 3%.
Yeah.
So in a lot of small producers are finding very, very successful dealing with the likes of, you know, the discounters as they
But I think the point that Keith was making, which is a very good point as well, is that if you every 6 weeks can buy a cheese, I mean it's not sustainable for Aldi to take 4% all the time. They wouldn't have a business if they only took 4% all the time. So if you have a cheese that's going on sale every 6 weeks at that low price, and then you have the independents who are selling it, you know, so it's on sale at, you know, €9 a kilo or €10 a kilo, and the independent has to sell it at €22 a kilo in order to be able to make the margin that they need to make. So it's about what it does to the perception of the product as well. I mean, and I agree with what you're saying as well. It is good that I like buying good food in Aldi when it comes on offer. You know, it's in our nature to want to do that. So it is kind of a difficult one to work out.
But it's like with cheeses, farmer cheese, you compare it to like a good vineyard and wines. You know, there's different vintages and different years and different. You know, even as Tom was saying there, he's different cheeses, and you do different things for different markets. You know.
Yeah.
So it's a different, like Sarah, like who is one of the top 60s, she tastes every batch of cheese. But depending on the cheese and the age of the cheese, she'll know which market to send it to, you know. It's like with my customers, like I deal directly with chefs, I deal directly with independent shops, I go centrally into some of the multiples. But you have different cheeses for different people. Yeah. It's like everybody in the room has different tastes, you know. So you know your customer, and you know who their customer is and what they want.
So it's about education and branding and splitting your market and understanding how to the perception of value in each market.
My restaurant suppliers wouldn't want Coolattin Cheddar if they thought it was in Aldi.
Yes,
they
that's
wouldn't take it.
It's devaluing yourself, so how you devalue yourself.
Yeah.
When you explain, like I mean, Cashew Blue, the Burgess and Porter, I mean, that is one of the most successful food industries in the country, not to talk about within the cheese industry. And they do sell to Aldi and Lidl and still sell to the top restaurants and shops. It's all different because there's different maturities of cheeses, and it will taste different.
You will get a beautiful,
different packaging,
different name.
I'd say it's down to different age actually.
With different ages, but even in the likes of
selected and matured for
you can find Cashew Blue
for the restaurant
in 4 different types of packaging in one of the multiples.
Yeah.
But those 4 cheeses will not taste the same. But they're all coming from Cashew Blue.
And you won't buy one of those in a farmer's market.
No.
Can I ask, I kind of understood that like Lidl and Aldi sort of bought the lower grade, nothing there's anything wrong with it and stuff, but not, and then the premium cheeses went to the better shop, is that correct?
Well, that's what you'd be sensibly doing. Yes, you'd be taking the worst of what you have and giving it to.
But it's still good cheese.
But it's still profile.
It's the age profile.
It tastes very different. If you buy Cashew Blue in Aldi or whatever, it tastes quite different.
It's the age profile. You know, it's the age profile.
I'd suggest you put it away for 2 months.
Because obviously the longer you hold your cheese, the more you need to get for your cheese. Because the cost of holding it, you know what I mean? So
Siobhan, your product into the supermarkets is not organic. Could you talk about the difference between conventional and organic and what you think is on trend? Or
what is on trend? The reason why we decided we produce raw cheese and pasteurized cheese. We also produce organic and conventional cheese. The reason being for the different markets and what our different customers want, and then the price that they can pay. We couldn't within the supermarket. So that's why we haven't got an organic label on because this is not organic what you're getting inside the supermarkets. You will know by a product when you buy it whether it's organic or not, because when you're organic, when you're certified organic, you have to have your label and your code. You've a distinct number, a number on it. So it depends. A discussion I had earlier. The organics in Ireland is in a difficult place, I would say. It is struggling to hold its identity. Local has become a strong brand. Origin Green. Actually, hands up, how many people in the room are aware of Origin Green? Yeah, so this is, what do we call it? A project?
An initiative.
An initiative by Board B of the Irish Food Board called Origin Green. It is to get food companies to think about sustainability and to incorporate in their business to make food production more sustainable in Ireland, and that we would become recognised as a leader in sustainability. I think the fact that Origin Green has been established has affected the image of organics. I don't know what people who are in organic production would agree or disagree with me. I think it has watered it down. It has watered it down. It has led to confusion by the customer and by the consumer, which is not good. Because I truly believe in sustainability. I'm not sure what that is. And there's nothing more sustainable than organics. Organic production is the most sustainable part of production. So it's difficult. Organics are in a difficult place.
Just to clarify, is a proportion of the ingredients organic or produced sustainably, but it's not the whole?
No. If you're a registered organic product, 99% of the products and ingredients are organic.
So what's the angle with
Origin Green?
Origin Green. What's its pitch?
It's more of a holistic program than
It's the whole business.
Based on the principles of, well, my understanding is that the whole basis of the initiative is that your whole business is based on the principles of sustainable development. And so every aspect, not just the ingredients in your product, but every aspect. So your waste, your resource use, everything.
Your energy, your resource.
Yeah.
And Board B
packaging.
Credit, they're the ones who monitor it and police it.
So they started, I have to share, we were actually one of the fully fledged members, 35 people, companies in Ireland are members of Origin Green. It goes through one of the smaller companies. And I've heard maybe a couple of remarks today about people stating it. I actually think it's a fantastic standard, obviously because we're part of it. But I wasn't aware of the damage it was doing to the likes of organic, because organic is very important out of Ireland especially. Yeah.
Well, we're a paid up member of Origin Green as well. But I mean, when it came out, first of all, I thought it was the level of entry was so low. But I suppose I was coming from an organic perspective, do you know what I mean, where I was coming from. Maybe the thought within the Food Board and the Department of Education is get everybody in and then ratchet up the standards year by year, you know what I mean? Because sustainability is the way to go, So, but I don't know, I'm a bit dubious.
I thought that was how it works. I don't know. Is it the level of you work up to a level of standard? So you start at a low.
You're a member now, are you?
Yes,
you're one of the 40 companies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a paperwork, and I was registered organic. Which is, you know what I mean? It was.
Well, we decided not to bother with the organics because we're now members of Origin Green.
That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, and there's a lot more promotion going in from the government ages into Origin Green.
Can I just come in here to clarify that Origin Green has absolutely nothing to do with organic standards. 100%, but it does in perception to apply that, and it has watered it down in perception, which is being trying to be sorted out at the moment. Not Board B's fault, not anyone's fault, but that is the way it is.
Yeah, but you see,
but organics have a set standard, and you can only be guaranteed your product is organic and safe if it has the label on the actual product.
organic as well. I mean, it's either organic or it's not.
Yes.
There's degrees of sustainability.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you will go to markets, farmers markets, and people will say, oh, this is an organic product. But they'd say, well, it's organic, you know. And I always look to say, okay, so where, because you cannot say it's organic without having a registered, the label and a certification. So this is part of the watering down kind of, you know. Now these people actually, because they're very tiny producers, you know, of vegetables or something, you know what I mean? So they could actually be doing it organically. They could be technically doing it organically, but they're not registered.
Or it's a conversion as well. A lot of people sell stuff as organic and they're conversion.
Yeah.
Now, but the reality is, as I was saying to the slow food people earlier, you could get a chicken that is raised in Monaghan in the most appalling circumstances in a concentration camp, fed nothing but genetically modified rubbish from Argentina and the United States, and it comes out the other end origin green, which is appalling. So origin green is absolutely meaningless. It's board beer trying to usurp the name of organic, which is wrong, because it will not fool the Germans for 1 minute, because that rubbish isn't even on their radar.
Just when it's getting interesting, right?
We need a drink.
There comes a time in the evening when even I would say that we stop.
Can I just say one thing? Sorry. There was this thing, sorry. Do you know about that, Keith? Just for the people. Sorry, there's this, I suppose, promotion going on at the moment with Board Bia. It's a European-wide programme. It's called Discover Farmhouse Cheese. So it's the second year, but basically you can Google it. There's a website, discovercheese.ie. For those of you, since you're here, you're obviously interested in cheese. It involves a number of activities, including visiting cheesemakers. Like we've one on next week. Helen is going to be involved, so you can actually go and visit the cheesemakers' farms. And so Discover
You
Cheese.
can visit mine on 24th of April.
Yeah, discovercheese.ie.
It comes up on the Board Bia website if you want.
Apologies.
That was good. That was really, really good for you. Yes.
I'd just like to say thank you. We've tasted some of the most fantastic cheese.
Yes.
Well done. So I'm very lucky.
And thank you, because I'm vegan and haven't actually tasted anything today. I appreciate you stepping in and saying that, much as I love the smell. Where are your, what's your name? Felix. Felix. To put the question to you that Felix answered earlier, where are your products for sale? Not afterwards. They are for sale afterwards. Please purchase direct from the producers. But beyond that, where are they for sale in Kilkenny?
The little green grocer.
Knockdrinna farm shop.
Knockdrinna. Farmers Market.
You will find these, I don't know if there is super value. Super value. And our fresh log. Super value in where am I? And independent, I mean, I know there's some people from Dublin here, so the likes of Sheridan's, Donnybrook Fair,
Fallon and Byrne.
Nolan's, Watford, in the little Greek group. And the little Greek boats are very local. Arkeen. It's all over in most good independent retailers.
Which is the classic way to answer that question. Thank you so much, everyone. As I sat through bread and as I sat through cheese, it becomes so apparent that although products get called bread and products get called cheese, there is such a world of a difference between industrially produced products and the effort and work that goes into producing properly made food, which is absolutely amazing. You might pay a bit more for it, but the product that you're getting, the taste that you're getting, the background to it, the raw materials that go into it are so different, and it's so lovely to be able to understand that. Next up, in terms of Biabeag, on the 7th of June, we meet the brewers. So we have 8 Degrees from Cork, White Gypsy, who are from Tipperary, and Metal Man Brewing, who are from Waterford. So that'll be a really, really good evening. 20th of September, which is quite a bit away in fairness, we have Brock from Badger and Dodo, Pizzi from 3FE and Jennifer from Ponair. My apologies, I can't pronounce that, it's an Irish word. And we'll be here talking about the art of coffee roasting. We will. Ponera. I'm going to have to learn that between now and like the same problem with Arbutus for quite a while. Sometime in November we'll do chocolate. I know one of the chocolate makers who will be Mary the Truffle Fairy. And there will be 2 other chocolate makers, and I need to confirm those, so that will be in November. And on the 24th of January 2015, we'll be doing Real Bread 2. So the same 3 makers will be here. I have the majority of your email addresses, so you will be put on a list. You can really easily unsubscribe, but you'll receive occasional emails on future events. For those of you who are food producers, the 10th of May sees a one-day event called Outstanding by Design, where we explore the world of branding and marketing, touching on some of the things we talked about here, how food producers, it is primarily for food producers, and it explores how food producers can use branding and packaging design to differentiate themselves on the shelves and potentially to split their market in the ways that we've spoken about. Thanks to Mick Burke, locally, who supplies this stage really, really cheaply. So fair play to him. Larry and Sarah and David, my brother, for helping out. Alec Taylor, a really good friend of mine who videos this. At some point over the next day or 2, because it takes me a few hours to work through it, the full video of today will be up on YouTube and on Biabeag. To Josephine, who was a baker from Baking 1 on the 25th of January, who supplied me baguettes. Thank you so much. Okay, but all good independent. And finally, thank you to our hosts, Julie and Rod Calderpot, who are so gracious with the work that they put into this and supporting it. So thank you so much. And very finally, Tom, absolute pleasure to meet. Tom is an absolute enigma. You'll notice on the poster for cheese that there's 2 very prominent ladies and a tiny gentleman. And it's because there's exactly 1 photograph of Tom on the internet anywhere, and it's so small I couldn't make him the same size as the ladies, because he would have what's called pixelated. He just wouldn't have been doable. So I'm hoping that after this evening we'll have some slightly better photographs. To Siobhan, who travelled over from Clare, and to Helen, who's our local hero, thank you so much for sharing. That's it, folks. Chat to them downstairs and buy their cheese. Thank you again.
Thanks to Keith.
Can you make that available to me?